What is going on, my fellow Martians? Welcome back to another episode of Mixed Martial Arts. My name is Austin Shaper, and as usual, this is a podcast where we explore the topics of UAP, the UFC, and World War III. Today is going to be it's going to be a World War III episode, and we're going to be covering some of the events that have been going on between Israel and Hamas and the entire situation brewing in the Middle East. Now, I want to be upfront and tell you guys I'm going to miss some things because there's literally just too much to talk about for one episode. So much going on. Really, if we're talking World War III wise, geopolitically, it's not even just in the Middle East. We still have stuff going on with China and Taiwan. We still have stuff going on with Ukraine and Russia. But obviously, what's been all over the news cycle is the horrible war that has, obviously been brewing for a long, long time, but has reached this new terrible development. And it looks as if, so diving into today's episode with basically, it's going to be all about Israel, and I just want to read you guys a couple headlines because it's looking like the ground invasion is still going to happen. It was delayed. You guys know that by now. It's been delayed for quite a few days, and we weren't really sure. It's been up in the air. Is this thing going to happen? What are these guys up to? They keep saying it, then they delay it. We first heard it was because of the weather. Then we heard this was intentionally done to kind of throw Hamas off and keep them on their toes, and they've been taking out Hamas leadership. Israel has over these past few days with missile strikes. And then we had, obviously, a few days ago, the horrible, I guess you could say explosion. We don't know if to call it a bomb, a missile, or what, but in a terrible explosion at one of the hospitals in Gaza, killing, we don't even know how much. It was initially reported that there was over 500 casualties. Now, there was a couple videos that I did not know the authenticity of, so can't verify it, but if they were of what they claimed to be, man, it was horrible. Parking lot was absolutely filled with casualties, and we just don't know. And I'm not going to really pick a side today on who did the strike. Was it this misfired Hamas rocket, or was it from the IDF accidentally hitting the hospital or intentionally hitting the hospital? We just don't know. I'm leaning towards it is the Hamas misfire. I've been seeing a lot of videos. You don't know what's real, what's fake, and the fog of war is just beyond thick. And this is one of the first conflicts that we're seeing in the new social media age, and you're seeing with it like an entire new level of the fog of war where the misinformation, I guess disinformation, whatever you want to call it. I know they have a bunch of crazy names for it now, but you know what I mean. Information that we can't verify its authenticity on both sides happening constantly. Videos, we don't know what videos are real, fake, stories. So much going on so quickly. It's very hard to wrap your mind around. You see people picking both sides right after an event happens. They're quick to condemn, their opposing side, and as the story develops, the news changes. We just don't know, but the strike was horrible no matter who did it, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It does seem to me, from what I have seen, and I'm open to being wrong, but that it looks like that is most likely a Hamas rocket that misfired, or a Hamas weapon, I guess we could say. I don't know for sure if it's a rocket. I don't know the technicalities behind it, but there was an explosion. Supposedly, Hamas caused it. It was initially blamed on the IDF. IDF has presented what they claim to be proof that it was not them. Regardless, a lot of people died. There's been some horrible photos, horrible videos. Man, the atrocities that are happening on both sides of this conflict is just, there's no words for it. There's literally nothing you can say to verbalize like what is actually going on, and seeing it, just seeing the videos and photos, as I mentioned, not just of the hospital attack, but of everything that's been going on, is just, it's heartbreaking. And it's crazy to see us, humanity in 2023, basically have learned no lessons. It's just, you get the population revved up, be it about territorial disputes or religious ideologies or whatever it is that encourages political, domestic politics, whatever, that encourages people to pick a side and then hate the other side. And then, these conflicts brew over time. And then when they reach this kinetic point like they are right now with Hamas and, the IDF, you are seeing the results of it in the population. I mean, they've already been mass protests all over the place, both in America, Europe, obviously the Middle East, everywhere. There's these giant protests, and this thing just kicked off, just over 2 weeks ago. So It's crazy, man. I don't even know what to make of this. It does seem that the ground invasion is still going on. I'm going to cover a couple headlines briefly for you guys today, and then we're going to dive into something that I felt was worth covering in regards to this entire thing, the moral complexity of this entire situation, the moral loops that you find yourself in when you try to figure out who's right and who's wrong, the side picking, and, all that comes along with a conflict as terrible as this one is. We don't even know where this is headed. That's what's so terrifying. We don't know where it's headed. But let me give you guys some brief updates to my latest knowledge. So this comes from Gaza. It's supposedly their death toll has already risen to 3,785. This comes from the Inside paper on Twitter. But just under 4,000 dead already in 2 weeks in Gaza. So it's complicated because the stated goal of the Israeli Defense Forces, of the Israeli government, is to obviously wipe out Hamas. They are willing to accept a certain amount of casualties by doing that, civilian casualties. Now, let me just cover the brief headlines real quick and then we'll get back to this because it's a whole can of worms I'm about to open up, and, let me at least get to the news headlines real quick. Okay, it comes from Faye Tuck on Twitter, says Israel's defense minister Gallant tells soldiers near the Gaza border, "You are now seeing Gaza from afar. Soon you will see it from the inside. The order will come." So the order is coming for the ground invasion. We pretty much have almost 100% certainty of that. When it's going to come, I don't know. We're going to be hearing an address from the Oval Office from Biden tonight, I think at 8 p.m. Eastern time zone. So I don't know. He says it's in regards to both the Israel conflict and Ukraine. So what is he going to say? Is it just going to be condemning Hamas, condemning Israel, and pledging more American support? Is it going to be the announcement of the ground operation? I don't know. You have to, I guess, tune in and see. But that is going to be tonight. So we're hearing that the invasion is happening. It's 100. I guess we can't say 100% because we just don't know what's real and what's fake, or if maybe they're saying this to throw off Hamas and Hezbollah. We just don't know. But according to the defense minister of Israel, the ground operation is happening, and the soldiers are fully prepared now, and they're just waiting on orders. And on top of that, when Biden stopped by Israel to speak with Netanyahu and go meet with the whole war cabinet and all the stuff that he did there in his short visit, apparently we've heard that he gave the green light for the invasion. Now they need America's support. I don't know if it's just logistically with supplies or maybe just in the support of the international community, because right now the international community is very torn on this. I'm torn on it. I'm 100% torn on it. And you hear people like Ben Shapiro who are like hard on one side. I've listened to a lot of Palestinian voices on the other side, and it's hard for me to make heads or tails of it because the moral complexity, as I mentioned, is just insane. But this also comes from the defense minister. This comes from Israel Radar on Twitter. Says that Israel receives shipments of armored American Jeeps, hundreds of other vehicles on the way from the United States. It's the first time in decades Israel receives military vehicles during a war. So obviously, this doesn't show any signs of letting up. There was some hope that maybe there was going to be a ceasefire or something was going to stop this from getting out of hand, but it looks like it's impossible. And you can understand, I guess we can dive into this now, the moral complexities of this, because as I mentioned, the Ben Shapiros who call you a terrorist sympathizer, if you even insinuate that Israel is to share some of the blame for the Palestinian deaths, I mean, we're talking about just under 4,000, and that's probably not even going to scratch the surface about what's real about the numbers of deaths that are coming if this war reaches the point that it looks like it's trending towards. So there's people like that, Ben Shapiro, who naturally have a rage about them because of what happened. I mean, it's understandable. You can understand the rage from both sides. Sitting from a bird's eye view all the way over here in America, you can hear their stories and watch the videos of the innocents being massacred, and you, of course, can understand their plight. And it gets complicated because while I do say this, there's a difference between what Israel is doing in its intention to take out Hamas And the quote-unquote byproduct of that is the unfortunate reality that they're going to take out casualties, ridiculous numbers of casualties. But that is their stated intention, whereas Hamas, when they crossed into Israeli territory on October 7th for that horrible attack, they killed I think they believe it's up to 1,400 dead that day alone. So, I mean, that is a massacre. And the things they're finding on the bodies, the torture, the tortured victims, burned alive, all kinds of things. We don't know about the decapitated babies, but I mean, at this point, first of all, it sickens me to see people even arguing about it, because it's like, whether that story was real or not, I understand people don't want to feel like they're being fed war propaganda. I get that 100%. But at the end of the day, we saw plenty of videos and pictures and documented proof that they did things just as abysmal, Hamas did, as beheading these babies. Whether this incident of the 40 babies or whatever was true or not, I have seen personally plenty of things that I believe are just as bad. And when you're to such a evil degree of actions that we're covering, does it even matter what? I mean, they burnt them alive, cut their heads off. We were just hearing a story this morning about a family who had their fingers cut off and they were lined up in front of each other and executed. I mean, these things are unspeakable. So to see people just like nonchalantly arguing about this, like, and picking sides, it really disgusts me. It's sickening, and it just shows you like humanity has not progressed. And I got into studying geopolitics from World War II. I often talk about that, and just reading the diaries of those who were involved in such a giant conflict, and being like, my initial thoughts were always, humanity has learned, right? Like, they couldn't go back to that kind of barbaric action, right? They couldn't go towards that. Even if it was war, it would be, I don't know, different. And now to see it in real life, 2023, it's like, as I said in a few episodes back, it appears to be that humanity as a whole, at least the governments and militaries, haven't really learned anything except better ways to kill each other, worse ways to kill each other. And I do study and cover these geopolitical tensions and incidences and wars that are going around the world, but it's not because I'm like into it. I'm as anti-war as you can get. The reason why I cover it is because what's going on, not just in the Middle Eastern conflict, but Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, everywhere all over the globe, it has the ability to impact us on our daily lives. And it's profoundly jaw-dropping to me to see how like these giant events in the world can affect you wherever you live in your little individual life. I mean, these people, for example, in Israel who were living near the border, were just minding their own business, and they were massacred. And now the retaliation to dive into these moral loops that we find ourselves in. As I said, there's a distinction. Sorry if I'm being all over the place, but there is a distinction because, Israel is going into Gaza. They haven't yet started the ground invasion, but they're bombing Gaza in the attempt to take out Hamas. Hamas's intention when they crossed into Israel was to kill civilians. That is a fact. I mean, that's with all the tortured bodies they found. Everything indicates with 100% certainty they were there to kill civilians. They were there purposely to torture and rape and do whatever else they did. Israel is not doing that. Now, that's not to say that I condone or support what Israel is doing, because I do not. I mean, I just read you guys the death toll. It's almost 4,000. So you've more than doubled. If this was about revenge, you've more than doubled the amount of dead on the Palestinian side. Now, I know that that's not Hamas. That's civilians. We don't know how many Hamas members have been killed. But where it gets very complex is while the intention may be different. So I understand Ben Shapiro's point. He says, they're not trying to kill civilians. Hamas hides behind civilians, so it's Hamas's fault that the bombs dropping by the IDF killing Palestinians, it's a byproduct of Hamas's fault by burying themselves in the civilian infrastructure. And there is some truth to that in a way. But where it gets complex for me is that they are intentionally accepting that this is okay for them. They're saying, to get Hamas, we're going to have to kill. I mean, look, we're already at almost 4,000 civilians, and they look at that as a price they're willing to pay. Not only does that just continue the violence and the hatred and vitriol that's going to come against Israel, I don't believe it's effective. I don't believe you can just strategically bomb a city with over 2 million residents in it. I mean, if you guys have seen the videos, dude, it's innocent life is innocent life on both sides. It really is that simple. Innocent life is innocent life. Now, to someone like Ben Shapiro's opinion, he doesn't look at it as Israel's fault. But where it is their fault, in my opinion, is because this strategy that they're going about, it's not as if they accidentally are getting civilian casualties, right? It's not as if, Dave Smith, for example, on Part of the Problem, he had an episode a couple of days ago talking about this, and he had some sort of analogy, don't know if I'm spot on, but he mentioned if you go out into the street and you fire off, an AK-47 and you weren't trying to hit anybody and you accidentally hit a kid, that is horrible. That is not the same as if you went outside and intentionally targeted a kid, and vice versa. If you were trying to, let's say a man kidnapped a kid and started to hide behind him, and you just aimed right at him, shot the kid because you wanted to get to the bad guy. People aren't going to just look at that as morally simple as, okay, I mean, yeah, you took out the bad guy, but you were totally willing to kill this innocent civilian. And isn't the point you to protect innocent life? Wasn't the entire point of this defense, quote unquote, from Israel, is that they're protecting innocent life? Innocent life was lost, and they don't want that to happen again. That's understandable. But then to retaliate by taking innocent life, even though you're saying it's not intentional, these civilian deaths, and this is Hamas's fault, when you shoot those bombs, when you drop those bombs, when you shoot those missiles, for a fact, it's not a maybe like you accidentally were shooting into a building with Hamas members and you don't know that a civilian may get it. They know babies are going to get blown to chunks. They know all of these things are going to happen, and they're just pressing forward. And in my opinion, it kind of seems like Israel might be falling for some sort of a trap. I don't know how to really verbalize that, but to me, it just seems like they might be falling for some sort of a trap, because this attack that happened, it's almost like Hamas, initially, it doesn't seem like they had any follow-up. They just went with this, and on one hand, you could say, well, yeah, it's because these guys are like barbarians. They're not like a legitimate military power that's like thinking through a strategy. They just wanted to do this heinous act, to express their rage against Israel. But where it gets strange is if Israel bites on this ground invasion, which, as I said, all indications are showing that that's the case. If they bite on this and they get bogged down into this Stalingrad-type combat with, they've given Hamas, 2 weeks now to prepare with explosives, with traps. Apparently we're hearing there's miles and miles of tunnel underneath the northern section of Gaza. And they're going to be, not only do I mean like literally they're walking into a trap and they're going to be blasted with casualties. Israel knows that, and they even came out and said we're willing to pay that price. But not only that, but I feel like there's a trap in the international support I don't think is going to stay on Israel's side. It's already very split down the middle, but I don't think if they continue with this method, I can't support it, man. If you see the videos, I mean, it's easy for people to speak on it who have never seen the videos and the photos to pick a side. I think if you saw the dead on the Palestinian side, on top of the videos from what happened on the day of October 7th, as Hamas attacked, all you can do is pick the side of innocent life. I just don't know how someone like Ben Shapiro, I understand it's because he's Jewish and, he goes to visit Israel often. I think he said he just visited a couple months. So I know it hits closer to home than maybe somebody like me who lives all the way in Ohio, who's never been to the Middle East. And, I understand that I just feel like when incidences like this happen that are so terrible, it blinds people to any reason or logic. And, you can't take innocent life to justify protecting innocent life. The Palestinian life is no less valuable than the Israeli life. So like Ben Shapiro said, what are we supposed to do? Because he was kind of talking like, what's the solution? If you don't want us to bomb the city to get Hamas, who's hiding in the civilians, you want the Israelis to invade. They're going to take mass casualties. So you're saying that Israel should go die because they were attacked. So now Israel's going to go into a ground invasion and lose thousands and thousands of people. And he said that makes no sense from the government's perspective to do. And they're not going to risk their own civilians versus risking not citizens, I should say, not civilians, they're soldiers, but citizens. They'd rather risk the Palestinians, civilians who in some way they believe are affiliated with Hamas in public support. Not all, they've admitted not all, but they say that many are still affiliated with Hamas, and they're willing to risk that over Israeli life. And that's because they're looking at it from the perspective of a government, from a military, that there's sides and that their side is just and the other side is evil. But in truth, the crux of the issue is that the Israeli innocent life is no more or less valuable than the Palestinians' lives, and the same is true for Palestine, and that's why I don't know if I come to you guys with the solution. I'm not a military strategist. I don't know the solution. I do believe Hamas has to be eradicated. I 100% believe they're terrorists. I don't want to hear any of this nonsense of their fighting for freedom. You don't kill kids and cut off their fingers and rape and do all the terrible things they did for freedom. I don't want to get out of here with that nonsense. I know people posting on my videos saying, free Palestine if they support the attacks. I mean, you're a monster if you believe that. You're an absolute monster. Now, on the flip side, I believe you're a monster if you're supporting these airstrikes on Palestine, on Gaza. Not only are they not effective in taking out Hamas, who can hide in the tunnels, but you are eradicating so many innocent lives. And the entire point of this operation, right, was to defend innocent life. Innocent life isn't more or less valuable on either side. So you are literally, in a way, becoming what you were fighting against. Maybe not to the same degree. I understand the argument IDF is trying to warn civilians. They're dropping the warnings before they attack, yada, yada. They're trying to encourage them to flee south. That leads into the corridor that was bombed the other day. I'm sure you guys have seen the video. People have been arguing back and forth. I've seen people who've analyzed the videos on both sides come to completely separate conclusions. One stating that that Hamas had planted some sort of explosive on the road to prevent civilians from leaving through the corridor, and then vice versa. You hear that the IDF bombed the road to intentionally kill civilians. I don't know. Like I said, the fog of war is so thick, man, but at the end of the day, this is not the right solution. As I mentioned, not only is Israel literally falling into a trap going into Gaza, I think it's going to be a nightmare. I think no military is really ready for that kind of urban combat. I mean, it's just something we haven't seen since World War II. But on top of that, the international support is probably going to start turning against Israel the more these mass casualty incidences occur with civilians. You're not going to keep the moral high ground. And it appears that a lot of the Middle Eastern countries are going to be forming against Israel. I mean, we've heard that Hezbollah, which has already been in many engagements with Israel over these past days on the borders with Lebanon. Who else? Was it the Houthis in Yemen? I don't know if I'm pronouncing their name right, but in Yemen, we're hearing that they're mobilizing to potentially fight in this. Obviously, all the proxies of Iran, maybe even Iran directly, are all, well, we've heard Iran directly is threatening to get involved with this and say they can't allow this to continue. And Israel is just giving them all the more reason to combine against and combine a force against Israel. And can Israel take them on? I don't know, but I just think it's a nightmare scenario. I think there's evil being done on both sides. I think it's unacceptable from the Israeli perspective to be bombing civilians as your solution to take out Hamas. I think you got to go in on the ground. If your goal is to eradicate Hamas, you got to go on the ground. I understand it's a terrible idea and that many Israeli lives are going to be lost. But to keep the moral, I don't want to say superiority or high ground, but to know that your cause is moral, you have to fight it the right way. It can't just be as simplistic as, they attacked us, so now anything that happens past this point is Hamas's fault. Even the, almost 4,000 dead civilians, God knows how many babies and women and kids, old people, on, have been massacred, and in their minds, it's just a simple equation. It's Hamas's fault. I think there's blame to be shared on both sides. Obviously, Hamas hiding the civilian infrastructure is despicable and evil and cowardice and everything a terrorist organization would do. On the flip side, Israel not taking that into account. You can't just say it's an accidental byproduct. At this point, it's very intentional to kill civilians. They know they're killing civilians. And whether the intent is to get Hamas or to get the civilians, when you know the result is get more civilians than Hamas and you proceed with that anyway, you no longer have high ground, in my opinion. You have no longer any morality to sit on, because while there is a distinction, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, there is a distinction between what Hamas did and what Israel is doing. If it ends in the result of dead women and babies and old people and men too, everybody, it's crazy. We don't really hear about the men dying. It's like people kind of forget about that and just say, okay, they're military age, so casualty of war, but then we feel obviously terrible for the women and children. But it's just as bad with any of the life is lost, but it hits the heart even more. It hits home even more when you see these awful videos of children and women. Obviously, it just does. And it's not morally simple. You can tie yourself into all types of knots, and I'm not an expert on the subject, so I've heard arguments on both sides. There's points that I agree to on both sides. I don't think it's an easy solution, but I think if you have to take out Hamas, which I do believe you do, How could you leave them on your border and live peacefully? It's impossible. Hamas does have to be eradicated, but it cannot be this way. It cannot be at the cost of civilian life. And then people are going to probably get mad at me and say, well, then what's the way, Austin? How do you do it? I don't know. I don't need to point out a problem. I don't have to have the solution to be able to point out that there's a serious problem with the way that Israel is going about it. I don't have to be. I can point out that there's justified outrage when you see what's going on. I mean, these bombings, it takes you right back to World War II and the whole debate of strategic bombing. Can you actually strategically bomb a city? And the answer is pretty much no, especially a densely populated city like this one. You can't strategically bomb it because you're going to hit everything. And if you know you're going to hit everything and you do it anyway, you are prioritizing your own civilian lives or citizens' lives, soldiers, from going in for the ground invasion over the Palestinian lives. Now, that is something I would expect the government to do, but for the average Joe, you and me, watching this, how can you condone that? How can you support that? I mean, dead on either side is dead on either side, and whether your intentions are just or not, the result is mass casualty events with dead civilians. I mean, I know war is hell, and this is what it does to people. It makes people crazy, and there's so much emotion involved. There's so much history and fervor and misinformation and media and propaganda, all mixed into now social media on top of that, all mixed in this terrible concoction. And this thing's just getting started. So my prediction is that Israel is going to go forward with this ground invasion. They're going to stir up a lot of resistance against them in these Middle Eastern countries, Iran, Lebanon, Hezbollah, which we've heard has 100,000 fighters. We don't know how accurate that is, but Hezbollah apparently is levels and levels above in capability and professionalism and so on and so forth, their weaponry compared to Hamas. And they're going to drag Hezbollah in, Iran, Lebanon. They're all getting dragged in, I believe. If Israel proceeds with this ground invasion, they're probably going to wait till Israel's nice and trenched into the city before they attack the northern front of Israel, and then it becomes a whole nightmare scenario where you do risk the United States getting involved. So this is what's so scary about this, man. Not only is it terrible for the people in the Middle Eastern countries, but there's a possibility that it's going to drag in the United States. We've heard that Biden denied the fact that they would start to attack Hezbollah if Hezbollah got involved. But the flip side of that being, and he also mentioned no American soldiers are going to be on the ground in Israel. Rewind what happened in Ukraine. He also said no tanks, no jets, etc. are going to be crossing in. And look, now we're completely funding the war. So I see something similar probably happening in this conflict as well. And it only takes one event. I mean, we saw how much the intensity and the hate increased in the vitriol increased on both sides after this hospital bombing. It only takes a couple more events like that. The ground invasion videos of the slaughter that's going to ensue on both sides. As I said, not to only cause a physical trap for Israel, but to potentially drag in the United States, who I don't know if we'll be able to sit out for too long if Hezbollah gets involved and Israel is fighting a war on multiple fronts. I just don't know. The combination of Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas and all these other Iran-backed terrorist organizations or proxy forces, you could say, depending on your perspective, they're going to be a problem. And United States isn't just there for a show of force, I believe. I think there's some contingencies in place that we don't yet know about. Biden is pretty much denying as much so far. It's just a matter of wait and see, guys. So I'm open to hearing your thoughts. I really would like to have somebody who's from Israel and somebody who's also from Gaza, from Palestine, to be able to come on and do an episode with me and kind of share their perspective, their side of this issue, and to kind of hash this out, because there's, as I mentioned in last week's episode on this, there's going to be people who want to fight with you on this and make you pick a side and disparage the loss of life on one side for the other and say why their cause is just and the other's is unjust. A line I've been hearing Ben Shapiro say a lot this week is moral equivalency. Basically just insinuating that you lack moral clarity if you can't make the distinction between Israel and Hamas. And I do believe there is a distinction, as I stated. There is a distinction, but when it gets this bad, the distinction is so slight. Ben Shapiro would disagree, probably call me a terrorist sympathizer for that. But the distinction is so slight, that murdering is murdering, and if you're doing it, yes, I can understand Israel wants to take out Hamas. They're not there to kill civilians, but they're doing it. They're killing more civilians than Hamas. There's a better strategy, and yes, it's going to require the loss of Israeli life. No, I don't see that as a good solution, but I think there's no side's life's more valuable than the others. I know the government doesn't look at it that way. They have to prioritize their own people, but for us watching this, it's hard to pick a side. I want, obviously, the people of Palestine to feel free, not like they're in a prison. And I want the Israeli side to feel safe and that they're not going to be massacred and have a slaughter like just happened on October 7th again. But the way that it's been going about on both sides is atrocious. Hamas is a terrorist organization. I hate to break it to you. They're a terrorist organization. You don't have to cut off fingers and heads and rape and burn people alive and say you're doing it for freedom. That's despicable. It's inhumane. There's no words for it or for its supporters. That being said, the people of Palestine are innocent people, probably the majority. Can't say all, but the majority of people are innocent. So innocent life being lost, no good solutions to be had. Let's see if the ground invasion is a trap, guys. We'll have to wait and see. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. I got to get back to my daily episodes. Took a little break, breather, just dealing with normal life, but back to the near daily episodes, guys. And as I mentioned, I cover not just geopolitical stuff with World War III news, but also the UFC and also UFO, UAP phenomenon. And been having fun doing it. Not really having fun covering this topic, obviously, but it needs to be said. And people who are against war need to be outspoken. So that's why I have been covering this, even when it feels very heavy to do so. If you guys appreciate this type of content, do me a solid and just click subscribe on the video, hit the notification bell, and then you'll be alerted anytime I come out with a new podcast episode. If you're listening to the audio format only on like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, anything like that, just click subscribe, leave me a 5-star review, and lastly, got a Discord group called Mixed Martial Arts, a private group. You can join it in the description below on this video if you're watching on YouTube. And we have 3 little subgroups for UFC news, UAP news, and geopolitical news. Share our experiences, our interest in the subjects, and just kind of make some friendships from all over the place. So if that sounds like something that's interesting to you, go ahead and join. I appreciate you guys for being here. I'll be back in the next day or so with another episode. Let's see what happens, guys. Just pray for both sides. Pray for an end to this horrible war, and expect it to get a lot worse. I think this hospital bombing that just happened is the tip of the iceberg about what we're going to see. I hope I'm wrong, but it's looking that way. Peace out, everybody. Have a good one, Martians. Take it easy.